So tonight we continue with the Song of Awakening. So I'll read the verse. I'll read the verse and we'll go on with the commentary. And as a context, this verse follows what we have been saying before, which is we're in the section on post-awakening practice. So the text goes, the mirror of mind reflects with no obstructions. Its vastness and clarity radiate through countless worlds. Myriad phenomena are all manifested. The perfectly luminous light that is neither inside nor outside. So this section discusses the mind of awakening and uses metaphors. The first metaphor is mirror. This is quite a common metaphor in Buddhism, describing the mind, the awakened mind. Second metaphor is light or luminosity. Which is another common metaphor. Light is opposed to darkness. So darkness would symbolize delusion. Light symbolize awakening. But these are only metaphors. The first point I want to say is people often attach to words. We're being linguistic beings. Words carry meaning, and they provide a framing for our experience. You can frame it positively, you can frame it negatively. And if it's not positive or negative, if we don't really know, then we have another word for it, ambivalent, right? Or confusion, right? Something like that. So these words, metaphors, tend to they pretend things are clear. They have the pretense. Once you can label something, then that's what it is. So it gives this illusion of clarity, free from confusion. And hence, the illusion of something manageable, something predictable, some object that's graspable, comprehensible, a sense of security. So a lot of spiritual seekers, including Buddhism practitioners, when they read certain stuff, and they come across metaphors like this: mirror, mind like a mirror, or the nature of mind is luminosity, clarity. It's able to radiate. And then, they take notes. They remember that the mind is clarity, the mind is luminosity. And they really think that's how it is. Of course, teachers, they produce books, and they repeat stuff like this. These metaphors are not made up by different teachers. They're in scriptures. So, scriptures are supposed words of the Buddha. But the reality is that his teachings, Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings, were not committed to written form for several hundred years after his passing. So that's why you have built into the scriptures mnemonic devices for memorization. Verse form followed by prose. So people will remember the rhyming verse form, and then they can unpack it, flesh it out to the Buddha form. And in this oral tradition, if you think that things are kept clearly, then you are very wrong. Different people remember different things, and different traditions have additions on them. So, what is the teachings? What is the state of awakening? How is that like? The Buddha was basically silent. If we take some of the core passages of what the Buddha had to say about this, supposedly. So, these teachings committed to text in a written form exist in a context, in a cultural context. And these cultural contexts, different tropes, discourses, metaphors, they change. For example, in early Buddhist teachings, if we try to understand the Buddhist teaching based on texts, that is, constructed, fabricated categories to try to describe the ineffable, then we can say that the early teachings is really an apophatic approach to describing liberation. It is a path of abandonment. Apophatic means as opposed to cataphatic. These are Western theological terms. I'm borrowing that to describe. Apophatic means to try to understand God, or in this case, ultimate reality, through negation. Not this, not that. You must get rid of that. You must transcend delusion in order to realize nirvana, right? Something like that. And nirvana is ineffable. Right? It's not in the realm of conceptualization of words and language, which are constructed, which are fabricated, which change. So in early Buddhist teachings, you don't have. I know of only one instance in which the Buddha spoke of the nature of mind in cataphatic terms. That is, positive terms. And the Buddha, in early Buddhist teaching, this is like in the context of hundreds of texts, hundreds of teachings, only one instance, he says. And this is one of the scriptures that's very rare, because the Buddha never taught if no one asked him. Usually you have to ask him 3 times. Then he would respond. On this occasion, the Buddha came out of meditation. He says, the mind is luminous. It's just, that sutra is so short. It's just a few lines. He opened with, the mind is luminous, intrinsically luminous. And he went on, described it a little bit. Very rare occurrence. The good thing about the early Buddhist communities, they wrote down everything what the Buddha said, what they memorized, and passed down orally, and then later on committed to writing everything, even if it's a little bit contradictory. Meaning, technically they can just forget about that small teaching, okay? Because the larger context the Buddha taught supposedly in an apophatic way. So I call that path of abandonment. Abandoning what? There's a whole list. Greed, hatred, ignorance, all the 20 or so subsequent vexations. And there are derivatives of these greed, hatred, ignorance, 3 fundamental poisons. And he lays out different aspects of practice, how to deal with that. So nirvana, or awakening, is only understood through the absence of this and that. And if you look at how he describes emptiness, he doesn't describe it as a nature of mind. The early text. He talks about emptiness as an absence of this and that. So, my friend, Bhikkhu Analayo has translated a couple of texts dealing with emptiness. This is something that he's very interested in, so he translated, isolated different texts, 2 specifically, and he published on them. And before he published them, he sent it to me. He has his translations, text. He also checked with the Chinese, and then he sent it to me to check his translations and his comment to them. So that's something you can consult. It's a very good translation. But that says something about that early cultural context through which how they tend to use words, right, apathetically. But based on that minor teaching of luminosity, later Buddhist teachings took that and just ran with it. In later, now we're talking about the emergence of Mahayana, right? The great teachings, and of which there are different strands of it. And this minor teaching in later later kind of cultural context and paradigms really expounded on this and expanded it. And the text scriptures that emerged, that elaborated on this teaching, you can really see a strong presence of a cataphatic approach to understanding nature of reality. That is, understanding ultimate reality not through negation, but through positing some essential features. And later on, that developed into Tathagata Garbha, or maybe you have heard more commonly expressed as Buddha nature. Buddha nature. Garbha means womb or matrix. Tathagata is an epithet of the awakened one, Buddha. It's an honorific way to address the Buddha. Thus come, thus gone. As if come, as if gone. That's the meaning of Tathagata. So in this Buddha nature strand of Mahayana Buddhist teaching, you get descriptions like this. You have analogies of the mind like a mirror in the scriptures, and you have analogies, metaphors of mindless, luminous light. Luminous light. That mindless, luminous can be found in early teaching, but really kind of insignificant. Now, what do we do with these metaphors? We have to understand that they are metaphors. Whether you explain things positively or explain things in terms of negation, these are all like fingers pointing at the moon. This is the Chan Zen analogy, fingers pointing at the moon. It's not the moon itself. Not to say that this metaphor is any better, because this metaphor reifies some notion of the moon, just like the mirror. The mirror, mind like a mirror. It's as if there's a mirror, as if there's a reified thing, and the images. There's problems with these metaphors, but practitioners, they get too caught up with these words and language they attach to it. They can have arguments about it. So that's the first thing I want to say. Don't get caught up with the words. Understand the meaning. Don't rely on words. Rely on the meaning. There's actually 4 sets There's actually a set of 4 for this. Have you heard of this? 4 reliances? 4 reliances? Okay. The first one is don't rely on words, rely on the meaning. Next. Don't rely on consciousness, rely on wisdom. Actually, I forget the first one. The words and meaning is the second one. Third one is consciousness versus wisdom. The fourth one is don't rely on conventional truth, rely on ultimate truth. The first one is don't rely on teacher, rely on oneself. I think. Now, can teachers provide guidance? Yes. Do words have meaning? Yes. Can they provide as a compass? Yes. But anything can be objects of attachment. Anything can be objects of attachment, hence become obstacle. Right? The mind and its problems likes to reify, solidify. It likes to make everything into a thing. That's one of the main features. Right? So it can turn anything into problems. It can turn Buddha's teachings into a thing. And then since the Buddha has taught many different people, different sets of teachings, some of them are incongruent with one another. So he taught one person one way, taught another person another way. If they grasp onto the teachings, the words, then they'll have a problem with each other. So if the early Buddhist teachings, so people have problem with these different yanas, different traditions. So, early teaching. If you base on the text, all you see is just like this is a path of abandonment. And there's clear delineations of good and bad. Clear delineation, nirvana, samsara. You don't confuse the two. If you go to Mahayana teachings, then it's not a path of abandonment anymore. It's kind of like a path of transformation. Because the contents of the teachings, different strands of Mahayana teaching, is really talking about transforming samsara, causes of suffering, into opportunity for awakening. Right? So the various practices of generosity, virtue, patience, diligence, meditation, wisdom, they're all interactive. The way it's explained is all interacted, embedded in the relationships between people. How can you cultivate generosity if people don't need help? How can you cultivate virtue when there is no harm or unwholesome activities that we see within ourselves, with others? How can you cultivate patience when there's no annoying people in the world? Right? Everywhere. Right? If there's no animosity, if there's no injustice, how can you cultivate diligence when we see all the wrongs of the world? So that means what? That means all the ups and downs and challenges and difficulties and threats and the trauma and the pain and suffering, they become the arena through which our potentials are drawn out. Our resourcefulness are drawn out. Hence, samsara is the arena for nirvana. So there's less of this polarizing tendency of good and bad, more of this integration, transformation. So it's not about abandoning, the poisons of the mind. It's about transforming the poisons into, desire, passion, transformed to compassion. So on and so forth. Right? Transforming ignorance to wisdom. Right? So Mahayana, if we base on a text, you see this, it's the path of transformation. And if you look at Chan text, Zen text, they don't talk about transformation anymore. Chan, Zen, Song, Korean pronunciation, was emerged as a tradition that was founded on or fully embedded in the Mahayana tradition. And it was not a widespread tradition, it was a monastic tradition. So you're talking about people that are already well learned, studied, and practiced. So you don't really find discourses, you don't find the rhetoric of transformation. What you do find is this subcultural context, another paradigm. So if we speak of early Buddhism as one set of paradigm, the second one Mahayana, another paradigm. Chan, when you get to Chan, it's another. They're operating within a different paradigm. This is what I call the path of recognition. Seeing the nature of things, whether it's samsara or nirvana, good or bad, right? Seeing the true nature of how things are, whether it's delusion or awakening. Right? And he talks about the nature of mind a lot, right? Seeing the nature of mind. So and Chan was built on the foundation of this cataphatic approach of Mahayana in speaking about Buddha nature. So it still has traces of that positivism. But later form of Chan dropped that too. Right? They don't talk about Buddha nature anymore. So they don't talk about nature of mind even. But they do talk about the functioning of freedom. Functioning of freedom. Or a technical Buddhist term would be awakening. But they drop that word too. They don't talk about awakening, delusion. So it's a kind of a path that is the path of recognition, but it doesn't really get involved with cataphatic or apophatic approach to understanding reality. Just put it aside. And it stresses the direct, immediate manifestation of the state free from delusion, or you can call it freedom. So with that kind of second point, prelude. First point is just words. Don't get too caught up with it. That's the first point. Right? These are metaphors. And people love metaphors. They love to memorize them, debate on them, attach to them. Second point, these metaphors have particular context. And in that cultural, textual context, we can recognize three distinct paradigm shifts. And it gives us a kind of framing. But my point on the second point is that these paradigm shifts merely express the textual context. Right? It's not really that there's Hinayana, and then there's Mahayana, and then there's Vajrayana or Chan. Vajrayana and Chan would be on par. Right? If you listen to Chan Zen folks, if you take the stance of the Vajrayana folks, from their perspective, that's Hinayana, lesser vehicle. This is Mahayana. Within Mahayana, there's a real kernel within Mahayana that's really the best, and that is Vajrayana or Chan Zen. People that debate like this, they just caught up with words. They don't understand what they're talking about. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, there has always been a strong scholarly stream of great thinkers, right, that produce treatises, commentaries. Right? So they debate. Again, words are helpful for most people. They have the pretense of clarifying things. It's just a pretense. It's just a pretense. That's the illusion of words and language. If you can name it, if you can say the name, it reify, solidify, distinct from that. See? If you say this is not that. That's the nature of word. The nature of word is divide, segregate, discriminate, or clarify, which is discriminate, right? Distinction. So it has the pretense of discriminating, but really the second point I want to make is there's no Hinayana, Mahayana, or anything higher called Chan, Zen, or Vajrayana. Right? Expedite path. Well, is there nothing then? Oh. Is there awakening? Yes. Is awakening contingent on words and language? It depends on different cultural contexts. Different period of time, different teachers will express a certain way. That's because they are products of that culture. So they tend to say it this way. Why do I spend some time on this? Because I see people debating about Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. And when they talk about Vajrayana, this is a Chan text. Chan is very close to Vajrayana text. They have the traces of the Tathagata Buddha nature thought, traces in them. And they tend to write like this. The mirror of mind reflects with no obstructions. It's a metaphor of the mind, the nature of mind, and its wondrous function. If the mirror is old and oxidized and dusty, then there's a lot of obstructions. It doesn't even reflect, right? So this wonderful analogy is the mirror mind, clear, luminous. It doesn't obstruct because anything that stands in front of it, it reflects perfectly, right? And if that which stands before it moves, it doesn't leave any traces either. So it sounds enticing, doesn't it? How many of you want to have a mirror mind? Raise your hand. Yes, I want it. You know, how the hell would that work? Like, mirror mind, mirror mind, mirror mind, mirror mind. You're looking at someone, mirror mind. All this is really talking about the self-referentiality. Me, I, mine, the center of the world. It's absent. That's what it is. Chan has his own language. He speaks of this as no mind. It's not a translation problem. Even Chinese people, Japanese people, when they hear this, they are confused. No mind, what is that? What does no mind mean? The mind, they refer to mind as the deluded mind. There's no deluded mind. Why is it deluded? Because it's clouded, obstructed by self-referential thinking. Now, what is self-referential thinking? Gaining, losing, success, failure, having, lacking, exists, not exist. You see? All the problem that comes with language. And being linguistic beings, we're completely, through and through, bound by this way of thinking. I'm not successful enough. I lack. I need to get that. I need to have some of that bling bling. Right? Lack, having, seeking, rejecting. So our choices, our life choices, our decisions about our health, about our sanity, about our welfare is completely bound up, caught up with these polarizing tendencies. Now, who's dictating these polarizing tendencies? Who's promoting it, fueling it? Greed. That's what it is. Greed and aversion. Right? Greed and aversion. Out of greed and aversion comes all kinds of wondrous innovation, one of which is called capitalism, right? So we're brainwashed into thinking, I don't have that kind of body. I lack. Right? Or I have too much of this. Right? I must reject. Right? So, and then how? You gotta buy this product. This will help you get rid of the fat that's on your body, on your face. And if you want to have a better body, you should have this product, which will put fat on certain part of your body. In case that part of the body is flat, buy this product will make that part pop out more. You know, it's just shuffling fat around. You know, this one you take fat from there, you put it over there. Right? And that's like, you know, it's like sweeping dirt around on the ground. One of Buddha's disciples was awakened by that. He was kind of dim-witted, IQ pretty low. This should give us hope. Why? Because even people with low IQ can reach liberation. Okay? The Buddha, everyone gave up on him. They try to teach him, okay? All things are impermanent. Therefore, they have no entity, fixed entity. Right? So remember, all things are impermanent. All things are what? All things are impermanent. Okay, impermanent. What's impermanent? All things. He can't even remember the first part, forget the last part. Forget the last part, forget the first part. Everyone gave up on him. The Buddha just told him. And Buddha just found him crying. He was so sad. His own brother. Both of them became monks. His own brother said, forget it. I give up. Just go. Don't even bother coming back to the Sangha. Just go. Just cry. The Buddha said, what are you doing? I don't know how to practice. I can't do anything like that. Sure you can. You know how to sweep, don't you? Yeah, here's a broom. You sweep the vihara. Come back to the Sangha. You sweep. Now, everyone's living in... This is the forest tradition. So they're living in the woods. Right? So they have kutis and different temporary huts and sweep. What the hell is the use of sweeping? It's on dirt. So you sweep dirt from one side to the other. That's like putting fat, too much fat here, take it out and put it over here. Or you don't have enough fat, I give you some fat. Gaining, losing, having, lacking, wanting, needing, success, failure. It's just shuffling things around. Right? So he's sweeping. First he was just diligent, sweeping. Very serious, sweeping. And then he starts to think, I sweep. The Buddha taught him something. Not Buddha Dharma. All things are impermanent, therefore empty or no self. That's Buddha Dharma. Jargon. Right? The Buddha just says, I sweep the ground. That's simple. Is that Buddha Dharma? Oh, that's not Buddha Dharma. Buddha Dharma is Tathagata thought, or is emptiness, all that words, right? The Buddha taught him the Buddha Dharma. I sweep. So he's like sweeping around, putting dust from one end to the other, inside the house to outside. Outside you gotta be clean too. He's sweeping outside. He's moving dirt around. And he's been doing this for a while, and then he thought, I'm just moving dirt around. But it seems clean, but it's not. It's just dirt. What is clean? What is not clean? Lacking and then having. My mind is like this. Bingo. Trying to get rid of something and trying to get something else. Bam! Full awakening. Not only did this guy reach awakening like other arhats, this guy, in that awakening, he opened up other aspect of his mind. What aspect? Supernatural powers. The different dimensions of our brain function. Some are just closed, He opened that. He opened that part too. So he had various powers that the Buddha had. So when we think about these metaphors, mind like a mirror, and the dust that obstructs. Right? Dust, bad. Mind, mirror. Good, I want some of that. We get caught up with these metaphors, and we get sucked right in this trap of what? Having, lacking, success, failure, wanting, needing, gaining, losing, existence, non-existent. And then there's garbage like this. I shouldn't say garbage. Useful for some people, Just like dirt. Dirt is useful for something. It may not be useful on your mirror, but it can be quite useful when you're trying to put up a new plant. That's cat nose, right? We need soil, we need dirt, right? We've got to go through the recycling process. Then that's the Mahayana way. Everything is transformable. You don't have to really abandon it. You just transform it. That's like the path of recycling. Path of abandonment or the path of recycling. And Chan's position is just path of recognition. Recognizing what? Recognizing this game of abandoning and this game of recycling. What's the true nature of that? You understand? So, now I am going to go on to comment on this verse following Master Yongjia, but I just want to give this caveat because it sounds too beautiful. What he's really talking about is selfless wisdom. Now, we only call that conventionally wisdom as opposed to ignorance, delusion. It's because we want to help people to get them into another trap. So they start practicing, right? Why do they need that? Because for them, they're operating in duality. They're operating, they have pain, they have anguish, and they want to be free. But once we get into practice, once we've begun practice, put aside these notions of awakening, seeking after this and that. We must. Otherwise, it's like a substitution. Substituting one thing for another. In that process, it's very useful to understand what is it that we are trying to put aside. What is the causes of our anguish, difficulties, the challenges that we face? So Buddhism provides different framing. Passion, it's possible to transform that to compassion. Right? Annoyance, frustration, it's possible to transform that to patience. So new framing that we adopt, it gives us a reference point. It gives us potential. It's kind of shines a spotlight on the potential that we have for hope, for change. And all that is very good. There's no denying that. But if we attach to it, then like anything else, becomes source of our obstruction. So I already spoke about last time, what does it take to realize our intrinsic freedom? I spoke about it last time already. So you can review the video recording. I'm not going to repeat it here. Any trace, suffice it to say, any trace of this tendency to reify, solidify, separate, opposite, any trace of that, we must free ourselves from that. So notions of the mirror mind, reflecting without obstructions. So all the things that we relate to in daily life. Some people read this. This is how they use it. I must have the mirror mind. This annoying jerk, this obstruction, and they remind themselves, no obstruction, no obstruction, no obstructions. He's not an obstruction. He's not an obstruction. He's, helping me. Right? Helping me. Now that is one way to use the teaching. But it's a very shallow way, because you assume that the person's outside. You assume that that person is an obstruction. And now we just give it a different word. It's helping me. That's a kind of suppression. Now, there are tons of undercurrents in that moment of perception that's leading up to we labeling someone as an obstruction. If we don't deal with this internal work, we just substitute another label, the help is very limited. What is it? What are our hang-ups inside that's allowing us to perceive people like that? Right? That I've spoken about also, that needs to be exposed. And that needs to be accepted, understood, and worked through. Then we can let go. Otherwise, if we just tell ourselves to let go, no obstruction, that's a form of suppression and denial. The mirror of mind reflects with no obstructions. Its vastness and clarity radiate through the countless worlds. This simply refers to the intricate, intimate interconnectedness of all things. The myriad world does not need to be understood as different galaxies and world systems out there. Right here in this moment, each and every one of you are embodying the countless worlds, the countless myriad differentiation, uniqueness that's you. All the different attitudes, different ways of doing things. perceiving things that's continually changing. So in the face of that, the vastness. So in essence, it's saying that each and every sentient being is self, himself, herself, themselves are vast, open, countless, immeasurable. And the relationship that it highlights it's an approach to practice. Right? So speaking of obstructions, these two lines, we can talk about it in this way. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, one of the Mahayana sutras, later Mahayana scriptures, or Huayan Jing, Huayan Sutra, it talks about relationship to obstructions. Right? How can one not be obstructed? Right? It talks about the mirror mind, unobstructed by the myriad forms and expressions. In the scheme of non-obstruction, teaching of non-obstruction from the Avatamsaka Sutra, this stage is actually shadow. So there are fourfold teachings on obstruction, right? Or interpenetration. Right? First one is non-obstruction with all phenomena, which is this. That's the first level only. Okay. Second, non-obstruction with regard to principle or the teachings, which some people have problem with. My teaching is better. Your teaching sucks. Mine is more advanced. Yours is intermediate only. Right? So, non-obstruction with regard to the principles of the teachings. So first one, 事无碍. Second, 理无碍. Third one, non-obstructions with regard to phenomena and principle, or phenomena and noumena, ultimate reality and conventional reality. That's the third one. Fourth one is, the third one is 理事无碍. Fourth one would be non-obstruction with regard to the manifold phenomena. So, principle, the teaching, disappeared. There's no mentioning of principle versus phenomena, right? Noumena versus phenomena. The fourth level is just through and through the manifold manifestations of phenomena. They don't obstruct. Okay. How do we relate to obstacles? We're not even at the first stage yet. The first stage is non-obstruction with regard to phenomena. Everywhere we go, there's obstruction. Right? I don't like this guy. I don't like this woman. This is strange. You know, there's all kinds of differentiation of phenomena, right? And everything doesn't fit. There's social injustice. And we're experiencing racial reckoning in America now. And inequality, obstructions. How is it possible to experience non-obstruction? Non-obstruction. Now, the Buddhist path is a path of liberation, freedom. It's a path of liberation, freedom of the mind. So, even if a person is free from obstruction, obstacles, vexations, that's the subjective experience. But the injustice, racial reckoning, and the difficulties that's happening, it's still out there. It's still out there. But how is it possible to experience that? The first stage, non-obstruction. We have to deal with discrimination. Because as long as there's a mirror, as long as there are dusts, there are obstructions. As long as there's a self, as long as there are others, there are obstructions. It's not to say we, demolish, self. Right? What it's talking about is the self-referencing habit tendency, which Buddhism calls self-attachment. They don't actually mean there is no sense of who we are. Of course, there's a history to who we are. But that habit tendency of reifying, solidifying, separating, that tendency is false. And that tendency is driven by greed, aversion. That tendency is a fundamental delusion about that. And no self refers to that tendency. Once a person sense of self-grasping vanishes, in that moment, that person doesn't experience self and others. It doesn't mean there are no self and others. The person's at peace. The person's at peace. There are no obstructions. In other words, the mind is not stirred, if we can even call it a mind. The mind is not stirred, moved, conditioned, manipulated, driven by the polarities of greed and aversion, having and lacking, gaining and losing anymore. So, but all of our life we've been driven by that. We don't even know it. So when this suddenly vanishes, it's like 100,000 pounds of weight suddenly disappears from your shoulder you've been carrying. Suddenly vanishes. And one's at peace. Can they function? Of course. They function wondrously. Like what? Going back to your analogy, like a mirror responding. So long as we don't attach to that analogy. Responds perfectly. There's no hang-ups. No hang-ups. There's no more models. There are no more, fixed, conditioned way of doing things. Habit way of doing things. Therefore, that person is actually more creative than other people. Usually we have a habit way of linking. Creativity is basically linking things, to be able to make connections, innovative way. That's one definition. There are many. So because there are no fixations, the mind is able to function very freely. Like a mirror. You don't have a permanent, carved, etched image on the mirror. The mirror doesn't have that. If you have that, then whatever stands in front of the mirror, it's kind of, it has to reconcile with this fixed thing, and things are not clear. Because there's no fixations, the mind actually functions quite freely. Or one's intellect actually functions quite freely. Right? One's emotions, feelings, no longer bound by self-referential concerns. Is there emotion? Is there a feeling? Of course. But it's no longer self-referentially bound. So compassion arises. So the first level, I was talking about the first level, non-obstruction, with regard to phenomena. That's what this is, just the first level. Self vanishes. In Chan, we call that no mind. No mind. 无心. Chinese, Japanese, 无心. So, because of no mind, no self-referential, self-centered mind, therefore, no obstructions. See? Vast and clarity, radiating through the countless world, myriad phenomena, all manifest. All manifest. If we read on, all manifest the perfectly luminous light that's neither inside or outside. Inside, outside refers to self and others. As long as there's self and others, there's discrimination. As long as there's discrimination, there's gaining, losing, having, lacking, wanting, needing, grasping, rejecting, which all manifest from greed and aversion. They're just different facades of greed and aversion to varying degrees. So this talks about. Now, if a person is able to embody this selfless wisdom, then they will understand the second level, which is non-obstruction with regard to principle. Principle of what? Principle of the teachings. Teachings. For that person, there's no Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. These are just words. It's liberation has the same taste. It doesn't matter what tradition within Buddhism. Same taste. It's articulated differently, different paradigms, different cultural contexts, different textual contexts. So people tend to describe differently. Non-obstruction with regard to principle. The third non-obstruction. Non-obstruction with regard to phenomena and principle. So the second level, non-obstruction with regard to principle of the teachings. That person, when they encounter some scriptures, the Buddhist teachings, they will immediately have a resonance. They will know exactly the context, the function, and the essence. They won't get caught up with, oh, that's a Hinayana and this is Mahayana. Right? They will see exactly the context. Why? Because there is no teachings. The Buddha gave teaching. All his teachings are extemporaneous. Extemporaneous. It just serves a function. It just serves a function to liberate people. You see? So the person dive into the teachings after awakening, they will be able to garner, learn, and accumulate multiple ways that the Buddha able to save all beings, able to respond. They don't have one-trick pony into how to practice anymore. The more they dive into the ocean of wisdom of the teachings, they're able to understand the context, function and appearance of all these different teachings. That's the second non-obstruction. Once the person, dives deep into this, they will understand the non-obstruction between phenomena, myriad sentient beings, and their habit tendencies, and their proclivities, their kind of idiosyncrasies. All the myriad things actually not in conflict with the different teachings. Right? Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, or Chan. They won't get caught up with anything. Nothing obstructs them. So, the teachings. And the fourth level, at that time, is there teaching? Is there a need for teaching? There's no more principle of the teaching. Why? Because the myriad phenomena themselves manifest the wondrous state of liberation. In all their delusion, in all the suffering, the inequities, injustice, in that manifesting the function of wisdom. Only if we, why is that? Because one is free from vantage points. Injustice, justice come from vantage points. Suffering, not suffering, liberation come from vantage points. When the person is completely embodying the wisdom of no self and is able to manifest that through function, then they see that injustice is the cause of justice. The people that are suffering, right? George Floyd, through that murder of George Floyd, opened up a can of worms, opened up all the possibilities of all the resources and all the people working towards justice. So can you call that? Can you limit that? Pigeonhole that instance to be simply suffering? No. That's the cause of wisdom now. That's the cause of compassion now. So that George Floyd, that bodhisattva, has caused numerous things, and it will continue. Right? What appears to be suffering, only suffering from a vantage point. So, no need for the scriptures to point out, in all the manifold ways of human suffering, agony brings about the resources for a future to be. A future to be. And we work towards that. So is there a thing that needs to be done? Of course. Is there justice that needs to be sought? Are there inequities? Yes. But in the heart, in the mind, free, at peace. We don't say, injustice, let me kick your butt first. Then I bring you to the police. Someone rob you or something. There's a reason why robberies take place. There's a history to it. Sometimes the perpetrators are the victims. Depends on what vantage point that you take. See? So, in our self-referential perspective, yes, that's it's a perpetrator. But, things could be quite different. Things could be quite different. It doesn't say we just sit back and just wait for things to happen. Wait for the difference to come. No. We respond with wisdom and compassion. And what qualifies wisdom and compassion is selflessness. Otherwise, there's always an agenda. So, responding in such a way, myriad phenomena, 事事 why? Phenomena and phenomena, mutually, reciprocally, non-obstruction, liberate themselves. And so, perfectly luminous light that's neither inside or outside. All that is founded on, it's founded on what? The basic core teaching of the Buddha. Of the Buddha. No self. Expressed in early Buddhism. Wisdom and compassion. Expressed in Mahayana Buddhism. Recognition of what is. Expressed in Chan Buddhism. No obstruction with regards to different teachings. No obstruction with regard to all the manifold phenomena. Okay?